Now, to go back to where we were, as you can see, we have Mr. Amram here, who is also in this picture, and who wrote the score for Pull My Daisy, and he helped Kerouac, who had lived and narrated the movie when it was finished in a sort of improvised jazz poetry version. So these are the words that Mr. Amram gave in an interview with Evergreen Review, basically. In the spring of 1959, the film Pull My Daisy was made. Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, Peter Orlovsky, Larry Rivers, and myself, the Third Avenue All-Stars, as one week described us, appeared in it. Alfred Leslie directed it, and Robert Frank filmed it. Jack had written the scenario, and after the film had been edited, Jack saw it. Because it was a silent movie, Jack was to narrate it, and I was to write the music afterwards. He, Alan, and Neil Cassidy also wrote the lyrics for the title song, Pull My Daisy, for which I wrote the music and which was sung in the film by Anita Ellis. Jack put on earphones and asked me to play so that he could improvise the narration to music, the way he had done at our readings. He watched the film and made up the narration on the spot. He did it 2 times through spontaneously, and that was it. He refused to do it again. He believed in spontaneity, and the narration turned out to be the very best thing about the film. We recorded it at Jerry Newman's studio. Jerry was an old friend of Jack's from the early 40s, and afterwards we had a party jam session that lasted all night. Jack played the piano, sang, and improvised for hours. And now, since we have the man here, I would like to ask, so how about that jam session that lasted all night long?
Well, that was one of the things that I guess we wish was recorded that wasn't. So the good part is that 50 years later, this particular event is being recorded. And I just wanted to say what a joy it is to be at Columbia University. I was here 4 or 5 days ago when the Alumni Association celebrated the writings of Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg as distinguished people who wrote books that could be judged on the basis of their value, not by the stereotypical labels of beat or beatnik. And this particular time we're thinking of jazz and its relationship to literature as 2 viable art forms that can be judged on the basis of their quality. I mention that because when I was chosen by Leonard Bernstein as the first composer in residence with the New York Philharmonic, and I was interviewed, and I mentioned the fact that my influences were Bach, with his gorgeous polyphony, summing up 300 years of music from, well, before 300 years of Guillaume de Machaut through Palestrina, through Bach, and Brahms and Beethoven and Berlioz and Bartok and George Gershwin, and also Fletcher Henderson, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, King Oliver, Louis Armstrong, and Duke Ellington. Some of the people at the Lincoln Center, this was 43 years ago now, I guess, were horrified, and they said, well, how can you equate barroom entertainment with the treasures of European culture? And I said, very simply, what they have in common is purity of intent and an exquisite choice of notes. I thought that would cool everything out. It certainly didn't. What I surmised was they were saying, here's some schizophrenic with a multiple personality disorder and a career death wish who's going to ruin our institution by mentioning the fact that maybe this music might have some great lasting value. And I don't have any bad feelings towards people who felt that way, because they were not fortunate enough to have the blessings that I had as a kid, to have my uncle, who was a merchant seaman, when I was 7, 8 years old, take me to the Philadelphia Orchestra, and then take me to the Earl Theater in Philadelphia to hear Duke Ellington's orchestra, and explain to me that these were great musics, that the world was not flat, as Columbus proved, but was round with a whole lot of different places, languages, food, people, music, cultures, ways of expression, all of which were precious, many of which were much older than this beautiful place called America that we lived in, and the fact that there were even people here who've been here 50,000 years, American Indian people, as we called them then, who had a lot of knowledge that we could be benefiting from to learn about our own heritages that we were born into, and then being grateful to be in a place where we were welcome, try to check out everybody else and appreciate that. So I was blessed to have what Wagner called an open mind and an open heart. When they asked Wagner what you had to do to appreciate his music. He said, all you need is an open mind and an open heart. And Stravinsky said, music expresses itself. So really, it's not that mysterious, but specifically, to answer the question, since it's supposed to be a discussion and not an insane monologue, the music for that jam session was a small part of the film, and if anyone sees the film, you'll notice some parts sound almost like neoclassic music, because I was also the composer for Joe Papp's Shakespeare in the Park, and I was playing with Charles Mingus and Oscar Pettiford and Lionel Hampton, and went to Thelonious Monk's house all the time, which was my PhD education after dropping out of Manhattan School of Music. I have 6 honorary doctorates, but I'm actually a history major and couldn't get into Columbia, so it's a super treat to be here and know that they have a jazz department, which is just like the classical music department. And it was Wynton Marsalis who made it possible for the Lincoln Center to do what all of us of our generation failed to do, which was try to put jazz just where it belonged as great music case dismissed. Now they have a Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, a Lincoln Center Afro-Cuban Orchestra, along with the New York Philharmonic and the Chamber Group and the theater and the opera, to be judged on its own terms as great music. And that's something for which I'm personally grateful. And unfortunately, a lot of people in my generation are so pathologically jealous they can't say thank you. So on behalf of all of us senior poppers who appreciate what Wynton did, and I knew him since he was in high school when he was in New Orleans, we all thank him for doing what should have been done 50 or 60 years ago. It's a beautiful thing. And also to have that here at Columbia is really important. Not just for people who want to study jazz, but for anthropologists, lawyers, doctors, space engineers, anybody. Because jazz teaches you spontaneity, creating on the spot, dealing with the moment. Charlie Parker said, now is the time, which is the philosophy that Jack Kerouac believed in so much, and we all did, of celebrating the moment, to dealing with the event, what they say in the Old Testament, setting the crooked path straight. When I played with Mingus and the cash register went ding, ding, at the Cafe Bohemia in 1955, I was a 24-year-old hayseed, panicked. He said, don't pay that cash register any mind. He said, if the cash register goes, boom, you go, giddy, and answer it. Make that part of the music. So jazz teaches you how to think. And as Professor Lewis said in the very beginning, with the relationship of basketball to music, to art, to jazz, and to life. Jack was a great football player and an athlete. I mean, we used to have jam sessions at Ken Karp's house in '55 with Clifford Brown, bless his heart, when he was still with us, and Monk, and all these musicians who would come and play just for fun and let us young guys be part of that. Very often, the music, we'd be playing for 24 hours, and then we would go out and take a little health walk to try to revivify ourselves. And basketball players, some of the famous basketball players of that time used to come. And I said to one of the basketball players, you know, I was a gym teacher when I was in college to help support myself. I said, it's wonderful that you guys appreciate this music. He said, no, he said, you've got to come and see us playing ball. He said, that's our jazz. He said, at that moment that you make that shot, that move, that's dictated by the emergency of the situation and how you respond to that situation at that very moment. One time only event. He said, that's what jazz is about, and that's what the highest levels of our game of basketball are about. So there is a relationship. And one of the things that I think it might be good to mention for all of you who are students, that in the 40s and 50s, when this music, these extraordinary kinds of sophisticated music were being created and performed, people thought that Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, and all the hundreds of other important musicians were playing wrong, they were playing out of tune, and they were messed up. They thought that Marlon Brando couldn't act, all he could do was scratch himself, because they'd seen Streetcar Named Desire, and his role when he said, Stella, defined not only his whole career, it also supposedly defined the Actors Studio and Stanislavski himself. I happened to see Marlon Brando when he played Marchbanks when a kid in high school took me in the 40s. When he played the sensitive poet, Marlon Brando could do Shakespeare and just about anything. He was also defined as being wrong. They said that Jackson Pollock was just, and Joan Mitchell and Franz Klein couldn't paint. They were just hurling paint, cans against the wall. The reality is that Jackson Pollock had studied with Benton, was an authority on American Indian sand painting. All of them had tremendous schooling. And when I spent a whole night with Dizzy in 1951, he mentioned about Pan-African music for the whole night. Now, I didn't even know what Pan-African music was, and he told me the whole diaspora of African peoples around the world and how all the musics that they created was left in those places where they were, and music that they took with them in their travels they brought to other places, and how this arrived finally on this continent in Latin America, and a different group from Africa that came had a different kind of music that dictates what we have as Latin and Afro-Cuban music, and a different style of drumming came to the United States. And these are all things that in 1951 none of us knew about. There was no Columbia School of Jazz at that time. Jack Kerouac had the same lines of information by hanging out with musicians, by being with people who were interested not in what we were told we or it was supposed to be, but rather more of what it really was about from those who had lived it and who had learned about it from other people, hand to hand, mouth to mouth, and heart to heart. So in the film that you saw, the saxophone soloist was a man named Sahib Shahab, and on all the talks that I give in Pull My Daisy and in my 2-3 books that I've written, I always mention he was the saxophone player. I couldn't get his name on the credits because unfortunately they didn't think that was that important, and I couldn't fight for that in 1959. Sahib Shahab played with Monk, played with Dizzy, was a great master player. And when Larry Rivers, who was a wonderful guy and a great painter, and was playing the saxophone and played for fun, actually saw the film, I said, boy, how'd you like that, Larry? He said, man, I never sounded that good. That was Sahib Shahab. And we also had some wonderful classical players from the European tradition playing in some of the other music. It was a combination of almost Renaissance music and jazz. And the thing that they had in common was a choice of notes where every note was supposed to be a winner. And if I could show you one super brief thing, that little jam session wasn't just people freaking out and hitting anything. The little boy playing the horn was Robert Frank's son. And we had that to show that jazz was an open door so that you could sit in as a young person. Now, if you did that in a jazz club, if they didn't throw you off the stage, they would say, I think you better go home and practice. And you definitely wouldn't be invited. And you never barged in. You came meekly with your instrument, and maybe at 3 o'clock in the morning, you'd be allowed to play one tune. That was our school. But it was always about mentoring and trying to encourage young people. So in the blues, for those of you that might not be familiar, the rhythmical structure is based really on the 2 and 4, or what you hear if you go to any kind of sanctified church. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. But it's basically that. So if you all want to do that, and there's only 3 chords. If you're a music student, it's the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant. So you don't have to be a PhD in ethnophonology. Remember that. And what the jazz artist did was to take that and just go. Just out 1 chord. Roll it. Okay, stop time. 4 chords. Then if you were to add words to it, you could just say, well, here we are, Columbia, you. On a beautiful March evening, I'm so full I hardly know what to do. With these distinguished scholars on this special night, it'll be verily out of sight. I never dreamed I'd live to see this day when the irony will celebrate jazz as it always been. Classic art form, all early since 1900s when it's supposed to be Hattiesburg, from New Orleans to New York, 9 years later. Something new each year later. Now since Shakespeare said it's so wicked, this rap poetry is just about it. It's to say that you could recreate yourself into every day. And studying jazz will teach you a way to create your own spontaneity, which is all about creativity. That's scarcely Pulitzer Prize winning material.